Hello and welcome.
Going to be doing a maintenance on a Kohler 8E as an Echo today. Disclaimer, I am not a mechanic. I am a boat owner of over 20 years that have done my maintenance on my own, and it served me well. Saved me a lot of money over the years. That being said, there's many things we want to take a look at before we get started. First of which is to clear your work area. Make sure that if you can move things out of the way, that you do so that you have an easy in and out around the generator. Today we're going to be changing the impeller, doing an oil change, changing a fuel filter, and what I've done so far, as you can see, I've lined the floor with towels. What that does for me is make sure that I don't get a grease print or something inside the interior of the boat. So what we have is a new oil filter, an impeller, and a fuel filter. It's a new oil. I use 10W30 in this generator. It's served me well for the last couple years. Will continue to do so. I always keep a full set of wrenches within reach just in case there's something that comes up, so you don't have to climb in and out of the pit once you get started. I have an oil filter wrench and two different funnels that allow me to get the oil into the top of the generator cleanly. A handful of microfiber cowls is always a good idea to have around. I've got the appropriate sized sockets that I'll need, an adjustable wrench, and a flathead screwdriver. I've got my oil change kit. I also have a full set of tools that I use to work on my boat on a regular basis, and a full socket set just in case. And of course, something to help clean up at the end of the task, some Fast Orange I use. I've got about 100 hours on this engine since my last maintenance. I try and do the generator every 100 hours. Some of the things we're going to be looking at is the fuel filter, and you can see it back in here. Unfortunately, it's difficult to get to, so we'll remove these three bolts right here so that this entire unit will drop down and I'll be able to get to it easily. There's our oil filter, and our impeller is in that chassis right there. And we'll be removing the front shroud that protects you from the fan belts. So I'd say with that, let's go ahead and get started. Gonna climb in. As you can see on this Carver 406, I've got plenty of room to move around inside. On the shroud, there's some wing nuts on this particular model. Others may have nuts. I like to try and keep all my nuts and washers and such in one place and not set them down to where I can lose track of them. We'll leave those there for now. Pull this off, set it to the side, and you see there's our fan belt inside. Looks like it's in good shape. Looks like there's a little bit of wear. You can see some dust from the belt on the side there, but not terrible. We'll wipe down that area before we put it back together. But what we're going to do first is loosen this belt to get it off, and we're also going to pull out this impeller housing. Now, before we do that, it's always a good idea to shut off your seacock. Don't forget to turn it back on when you go to test the motor, because that will burn up your new impeller, and it will also overheat your engine very quickly. So now that we have that off, we've looked at our strainer The strainer looks really clean. I just cleaned them about a month ago. I go in there about every 3 months and clean them out, make sure that there's nothing growing in there. And so we're in good shape. So let's get started. Looks like we've got a little bit of oil right here. Probably coming out of this right here. So it's something we may want to keep an eye on as we go forward. So let's get some tools down here and we'll get started. First thing we're going to do is loosen this bolt right here. I'm going to do this one-handed, so it may be a little shaky. I apologize for that. And then we're going to loosen up this one. Again, place all our bolts in one place so that we don't lose track of them. So we'll go ahead and slip this belt off of here. And there's only 3 pulleys, so it's obvious where it goes back to. We'll hang it off the side so it's out of the way. Okay, that pump is loose now. Now we'll come around to the other side. And we're going to remove the hoses. And I think you can see those right in there. Can't quite point to them, but you see my finger down in there. And then the other one's right here. So we'll do that now. Just going to loosen these hose clamps that are on here until they spin around freely. This is not the easiest angle to get at this, but I want you to be able to try and see as much of this as possible. We're going to grab a hold of the hose. You'll get a little bit of water. Let me get that a little looser. You could also use a nut driver on these if you have a long enough one to get back in there and get through the space. I don't have a long set of nut drivers. It's got to kind of twist and turn, especially after it's been on there a year or so. Sometimes takes a little bit to get it off. You got to put a little bit of muscle behind it. There it comes. And there's our little bit of water. We'll stick that up in there so it doesn't continue to drip. Pull your hand out carefully so you don't cut yourself on the sharp metal edges. And we can pull this out the front a little bit. Over here, I got a little bit of play in this hose. And there it is. We'll let that water just drain down in the bilge. We'll get it tidied up later. Keep note of where each hose goes. What you don't want to end up doing is having a problem with figuring out what hose goes where. I'm going to let that drain out a little bit more. There we go. Now that we have that out, we'll come up. And we have easy access to it up here. So what we'll do now is get the appropriate socket wrench. And I'll see if I can set this down to get you a good view. There we go. And got it on the first shot. How nice is that? Okay. So we're going to take these off. You know, some people say when you put these back on to tighten them down in a star fashion, every other one. I try to do that. Not everybody does that. After you remove all 6 of these screws, this should pop right off, and it does. Okay, take a look at the inside. Make sure you don't have a lot of wear. If you do have a lot of wear, you should probably consider replacing that. This has got a little bit of dirt on it, but nothing wrong with it. It's all good. And the nice thing about having towels out is you can just wipe it down on the towel and not worry about it. Okay, next we're going to see about pulling out this impeller. Let me see if I can give you a better shot. As you can see, what I like to do is note the rotation. So if you'll see the tines are to the left, that means this pump goes clockwise from here. Try and put it back in the same way, therefore it's not flipping the tines over. Now, if you do put it in wrong, once the engine starts and flips it, it'll flip it right back over. But I like to try and go with the same direction that it is so that it doesn't put any undue burden on that impeller on day one. Set you back down here. And we'll see if we can get a pair of needle nose. Grab a hold of a tine all the way through and just easily work it up. Doesn't always pop out easy on the first shot. Sometimes you may have to use a screwdriver to get down in there. It's a little tight on these to get a puller in there. But if you just work it back and forth, eventually it'll pop out. And if you get stuck where it's still not popping out, you get down in there with a screwdriver. This one looks like it's starting to come now. Just go back and forth, nice and easy. If you get stuck, turn the pulley like I just did a second ago. Okay, it's almost there. I'll show you a shot of that so you can see it before it comes out. Now there's a pin down in there that keeps it on the shaft and keeps it from spinning freely. So you want to make sure that that pin is there. When you take it out, it's in place and it stays there afterwards. There it is. Okay. There's that pin I was talking about right here. And it fits, it's a keyway that goes right in the shaft. And that keeps that impeller, and that keyway right there, it locks them together and forces it to turn. Now, looking at this impeller, I don't see anything missing, anything wrong with it. It's in perfect shape, 100 hours. And could we go longer? Absolutely. Should we go longer? Absolutely not. This is cheap. This is easy things to fix and not have a problem when you're out on the water. You'll notice that there's a piece here that narrows this pump housing area, which allows it to force the water through there by scrunching down on the impeller as it gets to this area right here. Just take a look at that, make sure it's in place, make sure there's no issue with it. I've never had one go bad. Our new impeller comes with the impeller itself, a new gasket, and some impeller lubricant. You know, if yours doesn't come with the impeller lubricant, I've used Dawn dishwashing detergent to lubricate it before sticking it in. And why this is important will become evident in a minute as you try and force this thing back in there. What ends up happening is it's tough to get in there without some type of lubricant on there. So let's go ahead and pull off this old gasket, and hopefully it comes off in one piece. They generally do. There we go. One piece. We're going to take a look at this right here, make sure that there's nothing obstructing it or making a high point or anything like that. We're going to wipe it down. Okay. Now it's nice and dry. We'll open up this new gasket. You'll notice, this is something you need to pay attention to. You see the shape of that, and you see the shape of the top of this. That's to allow for that piece right there. So that's how you know where it goes and which way you turn it. Hopefully that's clear, and you see how it's a perfect fit around that little shim that brings down. That's probably not the right word. We'll pull it off to the side, and now we're going to put some lubricant on the impeller. Just tear that tab off. I like to just stick my finger in the ends like that. Just put a little drop or two. Oop, a little bit too much there. And take your fingers, rub it in real good. Make sure you get it all around the edges. Doesn't hurt to get too much on there, because what ends up happening is it just goes out the water exhaust after it gets going. We're all set. Use my rag to clean myself up. Like I said, always a good time to have rags around. We'll set this back up in the box so we don't get that lubricant all over everything. I'm going to do my best to give you a shot. What I like to try and do is, you got to line up the keyway ultimately. So what I like to do is get it a little bit off to one side, and then start to push in. It's got to squeeze these tines down in there. And then you find the key right there, and then you shove it down in there. Shove all the tines in. You got the same direction where we started. We're going to wipe this edge off. Nice and clean. And again, remember that section of the gasket, because if you turn it the other way, what will end up happening is you won't have proper gasket coverage across the entire flange here. So we're going to drop that on there like that. And what you want to do is just get a screw started. And you'll notice I said go in a star pattern. For me, it's always a good habit to do that even when you're sticking it on for the first time. That way it reminds you to go in that habit. So I'm going to set this down so you can still continue to see, and I can use two hands to keep us going. Once you got all the screws in, just use your socket to snug them up. Once you get them all up against the plate, you get your ratchet. It doesn't take much to tighten these things down. Boom, that's it. And that's it. That'll stay on there and take good care of you for quite some time. 100 hours by my estimate. Just make sure everything's tight before we put it all back together. Okay, so that's it. We'll wipe this up a little bit. Always good to have a nice clean engine, nice pulleys. I guess some might say that's a little anal, but it's nice to see when something goes wrong. It's a lot easier to find when you have clean surfaces on your engine. We're going to set this down here, and remember which pipe went to where. I'm going to put that back on. I'm going to put this on here. We're going to put one screw up top to hold it in place. We'll go ahead and loop this belt over here to help hold it in place. On these 8Es, you need to be really careful because you really have to tighten this belt up good. And the reason being is there's not much surface area on this pulley. So if it's not good and tight, you won't get good rotation on your impeller and water pump, and you'll have issues. Okay, so let's go back over to the other side. Let's see if I can give you a good shot and give me an extra hand here. Okay, take our other water hose, connect it back to the top where it was. Again, you need to make sure which is top and which is bottom. If it helps, you put a piece of tape on it and use that tape to write top and bottom. So on this one we'll use a hex wrench to tighten it back up, just to show you some variation that you don't have to use just a flat screwdriver. That's all nice and tight now. Now what I did notice is there's a little bit of water dripped up in here and a little bit of oil, so we're going to wipe this down a little bit. A little better. Same thing down here. You see that on this particular model they've got an oil drain. You can drain the oil from down at the bottom. I've done that in the past. It's a little messy. It's got a hose here. It goes up and attaches over to here. And you could probably get there pretty easy. But this lip doesn't allow all the oil to flow out because you're going uphill at some point when it comes out of there. If the generator was a little higher, would have been a better design, but they didn't do that. So I tend to use a oil pump to pump my oil out, and I find that gives me the best results. Okay, all cleaned up. Now, let's go back and check ourselves. We tightened this up. We tightened this up. We know our pump is tightened. Okay, we need to reattach our other bolt. I'm going to go ahead and put the second screw in there. Now, the one thing I've noticed about these 8Es and similar is the ability to get anything in here to get some leverage on your pump so that your fan belt is good and tight. So what we'll do is we'll snug these up just a little bit, and I'm going to use what I can use to fit in there to pull this back. In this case I've got a rather large wrench, and what I'll end up doing is using that as leverage. I don't like to use a crowbar in here, although I guess you could. It just seems like you're putting a sharp edge against the side of the oil pan, something I'd prefer not to do. Others do it differently. Okay, so we get that nice and tight. We'll snug this up. Nice and snug. We'll check that. Oh yeah, that feels good. Okay, so the next step we're going to do, I'm going to get any dampness up out of here. A little bit of water down here. Just want to make sure that when we turn on the water, we're able to see if there's any leaks or not. Out of all the years of doing these, I've not had any issues, so we should be good. Okay. At this point, we've successfully replaced the impeller, reattached the fan belt, and made sure that it's good and tight. Okay. Last thing to do, turn our water back on. Again, this is one of those things that's very important and a lot of people forget, and it's easy to forget. So it's best to do it while you're down here, not make a second trip. So now what I'm going to do is dry up this water in the bottom of the hull. And that's it. So now the impeller's done. So what I will do is start this thing up. Now I'm going to leave that shroud off when I start it, just to make sure that the belt is going good and straight and everything looks good. If you look down the edge of it, it looks nice and straight in alignment with the other pulleys, meaning that I'm not cockeyed off on an angle. As always, safety first. So I'm going to pause, go turn on the bilge blower for 5 minutes before starting this, and I'll be right back. Okay, we've had our bilge blower going for 5 minutes. I'm sure you can hear it in the background. We'll go ahead and start this up. And the first thing we're going to do is look for leaks. Ensure the fan belt is in good working order, that it's going around like it should. But then we're going to go outside immediately and make sure it's discharging overboard, which will tell us that our impeller is working properly. So let's get started. Okay, nice flow coming out of there, as expected. Now what we're going to let this do is heat up for about 10 minutes. Allow the oil to get nice and hot, and that way the oil will come out of the dipstick quite easily as we pump it out. I'll be back in 10 minutes. Okay, we're back. Okay, we've got the oil nice and hot. Let's take a look around our pump. Make sure we don't have any leaks. Looks nice and dry. Belt tension is still good. Okay, looks like we're all set. The oil's nice and warm. So what we're going to do now is pump the oil out of this thing. So in my particular situation, rather than using this bottom drain hose to come right out of the bottom of the pan, we're going to pull out the dipstick. I'm going to wipe it off. Put it up on our edge up here so that it doesn't drip any oil on the carpet. Now that we've got that, we can take our pump, feed it down in through the dipstick. You can feel it hit the bottom. You've gone far enough. Now this is already hooked up to my battery. This is a Jabsco oil changer system. I've had West Marine in the past. This one seems to do pretty good. It's got a nice Jabsco pump on it, so works well. We'll turn that on, and you'll see the oil start to flow immediately. While I'm waiting on that to happen, I'm going to take this oil breather off the top of the valve cover. And you can't feel this, but the touch of the tubing lets you know the oil is nice and warm. The reason for getting it warm is to allow this pump to pull it out easily. If it was cold, it may not come out as easily. And you'll see me working this up and down just a little bit, just to make sure we get as much of the oil out as possible. It's not pumping a lot of oil at this point. I'll give it another 30 seconds to get out as much as possible, and then I'm going to leave the pump on while I pull that hose out. The reason for that is so it doesn't stop the suction and drain some of the oil that's in that hose back down into the crankcase. And that's it. Now we have our oil out. The next step is to remove our oil filter. We'll get this up out of the way. Next step, depending on your generator, what you may find is the angle of this could have some oil in there. So what I like to do is put a towel down across there. And you'll notice I have my bucket right down below here, which is where I'm going to drop my filter once it comes off. I'm going to grab another rag just to be on the safe side. Stick it up under here. What you want to do is just pull that off as quick as you can. And it's got some long threads on it, so be ready. And there it comes off. Last little bit. There you go. Okay. As you can see, that part gets a little bit messy, but that's fine. Okay. Put a fresh towel there. We're going to get our new oil filter. We're going to pop out some of our 10W30 oil. Get yourself some oil on the tip of your finger. It doesn't take a whole lot. And go around the edge. Just a nice thin coat is all it needs. Now, you're just going to screw that back on there. Be very careful that you get the threads on correctly. Do not cross thread this. And you'll see my oil filter is 279218. Just bring that nice and snug. Okay, once it's snug, what I like to do is just give it another couple of turns like that, and that's it. You don't want to use a wrench to tighten that down. It doesn't get any tighter than what's right there, and it won't leak. And it's also a lot easier to get it off when you're doing your oil changes like I am today. Okay. Put this all your rags now can go into that oil bin, and you're in good shape. So now we have our oil filter on. We want to make sure we don't miss anything in any order. So what we're going to do now is refill our crankcase with oil. Now, This is one of those ones that's not easy to get to. I've got a couple of different funnels that I've used in the past. This one looks like it's going to work best for me on this particular engine. So, and what I'm going to do, may block your view a little bit, but just pour it right into that oil breather cap, which goes into the valve covers and then drains down into the engine and into the crankcase. Okay, that's 1 of 3.5. Now, what I'll tell you is err on the side of caution and not overfill. So if you overfill, sometimes these things will leak until it gets down to a proper level. So what you don't want to do is overfill it. If it's underfilled, obviously what will happen is the engine won't run, because it'll say, hey, too low of oil, not enough oil pressure, and it will not run. So it's always better to go to the low side of what you want to put in here, fire it up, let it run for a minute or two, then let it sit for a few minutes, check your oil level, and then adjust from there whether it needs more or less. They say 3.5 quarts in this one. I think it's probably just a little bit under that. I don't think it's quite 3.5. Last time I ended up putting just a little bit too much and I got some dripping underneath. I thought I had a leak, but it turned out once it got down to the correct level, after leaking out, it stopped. So the oil level is very sensitive on these, in my humble opinion, of course. So this will make 3 quarts that are in there. Now keep in mind, this has to go down into the crankcase, and eventually, once you start the engine, it will pump it up into the filter. So let's go ahead, put our dipstick back in, and check our level. Looks like it's pretty good, but then again, keep in mind, we got to get the oil filter full. So we're going to stop at 3. We're going to fire it up, and then we're going to adjust, providing it starts and does its thing. So we'll drop this down in that oil drain bucket so it's out of the way. Again, we're going to check this. This looks pretty clean. I'm going to wipe off the edges, just clean it up a little bit on the outside because it looks better. Okay, what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to tighten up these hose clamps just yet. These hoses fit pretty tight, but I do need that on there for the engine to run. So I'm going to go ahead and put these back on here without tightening the hose clamps in case we need to add more oil. Okay, that's good. Now, I will tell you, if you wanted to pause and turn your bilge blower on to allow for the 5 minutes to pass and then start your engine, that would be the recommended way to do this. Since I've already been down in the pit, I smell no fumes. I've already evacuated it once. I'm going to go ahead and restart the engine without turning on the blower. Yes, that could be a safety concern, and you should always turn on your blower. However, I know my engines, and I got a good smeller, and there's no fuel down here. So I'm going to go ahead and recheck all my thought processes here before I start this engine up, because I have taken the oil out. I'm going to feel around here, make sure there's no oil. There is no oil as yet. Everything else looks good. I checked for my water earlier. There's no water dripping. I've reattached this breather on top. So at this point, we should be good to go. I'm going to go ahead and start it for a minute and then let it settle, and then we'll check the oil again. Stand by. Okay, that ran for about a minute. Now we're going to let the engine sit for a few minutes so that all the oil can drain back down into the crankcase. While we're waiting on this to drain back down into the crankcase, I'm going to go ahead and put the fan belt shroud back on. Now, I run across generators from time to time on other people's boats, and what people will end up doing is only putting in 2 of these wing bolts to hold their shroud on. It ends up being a little bit messy. Could hit the fan belt, tear up the shroud. Doesn't take but a minute to put all the proper bolts in the proper place. Let's go ahead and check that oil. Do a quick wipe down on it, as some of it's probably gone up the dipstick tube while it was running. Put it in, pull it out. It's right in the middle. I don't know if you can see that. I could probably put a little bit more in there, not much. So let's go ahead and put just a touch more in. So this is, I guess, about 1/3 of a quart. And that's what we're going to dump in here, is that 1/3 of a quart. Plug this back on. Put these hoses back on here. Oh, that's turned around. One thing you want to do is make sure your hose clamps are pointing in a direction that you can get to the next time you come and work on it. What you don't want to do is have to become a contortionist to get at these hose clamps. Hang on to it to support it while you're tightening it up. Go nice and easy. This is a plastic housing, so you don't want to snap it off. Okay, those are both connected well now. Let's check our oil again. Yep, there we go. If you can see that good enough, it's right up to the top. So that should be a beautiful thing. We'll wipe this down underneath here to make sure there's no oil left. Throw that in our oil bucket. Okay, that is everything except for the fuel filter. Last part of our maintenance today. Get our other tools out of the way. Clean up. It's always good to have a clean workspace. Okay, the last thing is going to be our fuel filter. And we're going to change that out, and as I indicated earlier, it's behind here, so it's a little bit difficult to get to. So what we're going to do is remove these 3 screws, and this fuel pump, the whole pump will come down and out of the way, and we'll be able to replace it at that point. So first thing we want to do is turn off our fuel. Never want to have any pressure in there. I mean, there will be a little bit of fuel in there that'll dribble out, but as long as we turn this gas cock to the off position, what we'll end up having is, well, less of a mess. And we've got extra rags for that mess should that come into play. In fact, we're going to put that down here now, just so we have it. So first thing we want to do is remove these 3 nuts. Good thing to do before you get started on these projects is to get your sockets out, get your wrenches out, validate what sizes are so you have them already out and available and you don't have to play around while you're doing this. looking for the right size. Always want to be very careful in anything to do with fuel. So what you're going to do is work this back. You'll see these washers will pop out. There's little rubber grommets there. You don't want to tear those up because that allows some isolation between the engine and the fuel pump, so as not to rattle it to death. Okay, we've got that out of the way. Now, this is a really tight fit back up in here. Now again, there will be some fuel spillage. It won't be a lot, but you should be prepared for it. I mean, I've never had one spray out on me. It's not been under pressure. Now, if you do have a pre-pressurization fuel pump that pre-pressurizes the line up to each one of these engines, you may want to turn that off before you try and take this off. I'm going to grab a pair of needle nose and help me to get that off. And there's that little bit of fuel I talked about, just spit out on the floor. So now you can see this is the fuel filter. I'm going to go ahead and get that off of there. That small wrench just barely makes it. Doesn't take a lot to get this off. Now we'll get some Teflon tape. Some people use actually threaded Teflon, but I use Teflon tape on something this small since it's a very small fuel line. Had to take a quick break to run down the dock and get some Teflon tape because mine was empty. So here's our old fuel filter. You can see there's some Teflon tape still on there. We've got that sitting there. Take some new, and you want to wrap it in the direction that you're screwing so it doesn't pull that tape off when you're screwing it back in. I go 2 full revolutions on mine, and that's it. You can also use the brush-on type. Just make sure you select the correct one when you go to do that. So now we'll just put this back in here. Use your hands to get it most of the way up there. And I do about almost a turn. And again, wipe it down. That way you see if there's anything new next time you go to work on it. Just make it nice and clean as you can anyways. Okay, so now we got to put this back on, the hose. And it's still a tight fit. I'm not going to bother replacing that hose. It was replaced last year. Make sure you get it all the way on there. Once you get it all the way on, you're going to screw that clamp on. And again, supporting all the joints as you screw in. Now that that's back on there, you stick this back up through the holes, line them up. There you go. Once you stick it through there, those rubber grommets will hold it in place while you complete the task of putting the washers back on and screwing down the lock nuts. Okay, nice and snug. Looks like it's all back in place. Let's check our work. can see that's back in place. You can see the threads right there are all covered with the Teflon tape. And again, you can use a paste on there as well. Just make sure you select the correct paste. There's some that are not for fuel. You want to make sure you get the one that is for fuel. Inspect everything else. Looks like everything else is in good shape. Our oil filter is in good shape. We see no water down below. So it looks like we've had a successful maintenance at 1,789 hours. And what we'll do is we'll log that in the logbook as well, so that we have a good reference of it. What I typically do is set a reminder on my phone for 9 months to check the hour meter and make sure that I'm not exceeding what I did the previous year, so that I can adjust the time frame in which I do my maintenance. But all in all, this looks like it was a successful maintenance. You see our breather up here on top of the valve cover is back on and secured. We've put back on our shroud that covers the fan belt. That's all in good shape. We've dried out the water down below. Our water cock is still open to draw fresh water from the ocean or lake. I think we're in good shape. It's time to start it up and let it run for a few minutes here and see what happens. So since we have cracked the fuel line, I'm going to run the bilge for 5 minutes, the bilge blower that is, for 5 minutes, and then I'll be back to start it up. Okay, we're back. It's been 5 minutes that the bilge blower has been running. We'll take one good look around, make sure there's no fuel. Looks good. Let's turn our gas cock back on. In my case, we're going to turn it back to the port side. I smell no fumes, so we're going to go ahead and start her up. Last but not least, when you leave, nobody should know you were there. Those towels and all the extra layers of protection only takes a couple of minutes to save yourself rubbing out an oil stain from the carpet. At any rate, I hope this video helped and look forward to seeing you in the next one. Please feel free to leave a comment. Have a great day. Happy boating. When disposing of your oil, make sure you dispose of it properly. This is one of those PSA announcements. Keep our environment clean. Doesn't cost anything. If you're lucky enough to have a marina that has these everywhere, you can simply dump them in here, all your expended oil. If you're not lucky enough to have one of these dump sites at your marina, a lot of auto parts stores behind them will have a place to dump oil. So at the very least, try to get rid of the oil in a responsible way so it doesn't pollute our earth. Not that I'm a big tree hugger, but these are simple things that we can all do.